Cancel culture is a new phrase that's only been around for a wee while, and it stems from the idea that if you say or write or tweet something that enough people don't like or disagree with, then you will be cancelled, you will be deleted, you will be no more, you will cease to function. It can be like a kind of playground scrap, if you like, but on the other hand, if people think it through, does it mean that they are holding back on what they really want to say? Does it mean, like in my interview yesterday when I was talking about travelling folk and fairs and what have you, that you have to choose the words so carefully that you end up missing the point that you're trying to make? And what if it means you sit down to write a book or an article for a magazine and you're so constrained at facing the risk of being cancelled that you don't write it? Well, what on earth happens there? Well, Salman Rushdie, the great author, who himself got into great trouble about saying what he genuinely believed and faced a fatwa over it, has said that in his view, left-wing cancel culture, that's his expression, not mine, the left-wing bit, is a threat to literature and freedom of speech. I'm delighted to say that Ella Whelan joins me now from Spiked Online. Tell folk at home, I'm familiar with Spiked Online, Ella, but tell folk at home a quick 15-second definition of Spiked Online and what you stand for.
So I'm a columnist at Spiked, and it's an online magazine which is primarily centered around the defense of freedom of speech, no ifs, no buts. And I think it's the only publication which really takes seriously the challenge of defending freedom, which can feel at times like a fairly liberal moment that we're living in.
Is there any evidence that Salman Rushdie has a point, that this concept of cancel culture is holding people back from saying what they really think?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of evidence in terms of there's been some really serious examples of where cancel culture, which can sound like this kind of silly thing, as you said, that is more suited to the playground, has real world consequences. So people do lose their jobs over allegations of them being racist or sexist or insensitive and not taking into consideration any context. People have been removed from positions at universities. People have been banned. People have lost their jobs. All of these things have happened. So this isn't just something that happens on the kind of silly platform of Twitter. It's something that is changing people's lives in the real world. And part of the problem that you've already mentioned is that the worst thing is this makes people feel like they're walking on eggshells, so they won't actually say what they really think about an issue. And that's no basis for any kind of functional democratic society if you have a public that feels like it can't discuss things in full.
Yeah, in terms of employment, then there are other legal remedies that if somebody feels that is the case, that they've lost a job because of that, then they can take legal remedies. But in the worlds that both you and I occupy, the written word, whether we're doing it as journalists or, for a radio show like this, or indeed for a magazine, I wrote a piece last night for another magazine, or right up to Salman Rushdie's level of a great novel, that's slightly more significant in a sense that there is no legal protection. I mean, David Lammy is attacked and then it takes Twitter 24 hours even to react to the suggestion that he should be hanged for what have you. There are very few legal remedies in terms of free speech.
And I actually think that's a good thing. I think that at times the government in particular has suggested legal remedies, for example, to do something about the serious case of censorship at universities, instituting policies which students would have to follow. And that's you can't force freedom by restricting it in terms of the law. It has to be something that's society believes in as an unfettered thing, something that happens organically. But the important point I'd make is that the people who really believe in cancel culture, who think that you shouldn't rock the boat, who think that you shouldn't have a different opinion from the sort of whatever the given PC line is of the day, are actually very few. That most people that you talk to out in the real world are able to deal with different opinions. They have rows in pubs. If you look at what happened with Brexit, you know, people disagree. This happens. We generally have a healthy approach to speech and to speaking our mind. But the problem is the small amount of people who are really hell-bent on making us all feel like we can't say anything and feel censored are quite powerful. So
I was going to let me interrupt and then carry on with that thought, because if that small group of people, and forget politically left-wing motivated that Salman said, and I thought that was not the brightest of additions to his argument, but if those people who do believe in slapping the lid down on free expression, even of stuff that they find offensive, happen to be on the board of governors at a university or happen to be on the board of directors of a publishing house, then as a society we have a profound problem.
Oh, for sure. We do have a profound problem. And this is why actually it's important that he's made this mistake of calling it this kind of left-wing thing, because it's not just a bunch of, you know, the stereotype I think he's going for here is that idea of blue-haired students who, you know, the woke crowd. It's actually not that. It's people who hold serious positions of powers, members of parliament, bosses who feel cowed by this. As you said, governors and universities, vice chancellors are all sort of basically under this impression that in order to get on today, in order to have some kind of social capital, you have to bow and scrape to the cult of censorship, which at the moment it really feels like there is one. It will have to take a few people to put their head above the parapet and say, I said this thing, which people are now upset about, and I'm not going to apologize for it. I'm not going to recant. I'm going to stick by what I said. And I think that's most people generally, whenever a scandal happens and someone says something in a mistake and then they have to lose their job, they have to resign, or, you know, or any of these examples that we've seen over the last few years, most people are sitting at home thinking, you know, I don't think he needed to apologize for that, or we can be more reasonable than that. But if you just don't bow to the pressure of it, that means defending freedom of speech. And it's something that's very difficult to do today. You get called a kind of right-wing nut job if you say, I think that it might be a good thing in a liberal society that we're able to publish and say things that are run contrary to the kind of normal political lines.
Yeah, publish.
What a world we live in.
No, as you said that, I mean, I share that view. Publish and be damned has a whole new meaning now, doesn't it? Yeah. Because damn means you don't get published again. But let me finish on this area, because there is an intriguing and vibrant example, I think, in the world of politics. And when I knew that we were going to be chatting, it reminded me, I have on my bookshelf at home, one of my favourite political books is Hugo Young, the great Guardian writer, who wrote a fantastic biography of Margaret Thatcher, and it's called One of Us. And it speaks to that very litmus test. And you go back to the history of it and the wets and the dries and the pro-Europeans and the anti-Europeans. But Thatcher's basic point was, unless you're, quote, one of us, you don't get a job, you don't get promotion, you don't get advancement. If you're running a government, that might be acceptable. If you're running a society, it is not.
Exactly. And I think, I mean, we can learn a lot from Thatcher, and I think a lot of her sort of theories, whether it be Tina or otherwise, have become more popular today, or often by people who would consider themselves to be much far left than she ever was. But the fact is, in this kind of perverse way, that people who argue that they're on the side of minorities or the oppressed, Trevor Phillips made a great point in a paper yesterday about this, are more often than not actually creating their own cliques. So saying, it's not about discrimination on the basis of who we are anymore. It's about discrimination on the basis of what we say, that if you don't fit that very narrowly defined line of what it is to be sort of politically correct today, then you won't get on. You have to toe the line. And, I've never been interested in towing the line in that respect, and neither has Spike. So if you get called an outsider for saying what you think, well, so be it. I think the positive to take out of this, and the positive is in Rushdie's warning, is that most people do respect and value freedom of speech. It's about putting forward that defense and challenging the people who say censor and, as you say, publish and be damned. And that's the way to create a free and liberal society. Final
point, Ella, is that, as is so often the case in a liberal democracy, is the danger that it is it's a gem in society, freedom of expression, freedom of choice, that so many who just take it for granted, while those who have an agenda are at it elsewhere. I mean, it's down to Joe and Joanna Public to say, hang on a minute, enough of that nonsense.
Yeah, but this is such a great point, because freedom of speech is not a thing. It's not a static thing that you can defend. It is a process. Freedom is a constantly moving and evolving thing, and it always needs to be defended.
Yeah.
And so it's actually a challenge. To uphold it is a job. It's as you well know, more often than not, the people who get cancelled aren't particularly very nice because they live on the fringes of society and the fringes of political ideas. And so this is work that people have to do in order to create the free society we want to live in. We have to live it. It's a kind of a living freedom. So it's a challenge that I think most of us should take up.
Yeah. And we've been able to talk about it quite freely because certainly Talk Radio is one that believes in free speech and freedom of expression. Ella Whelan, a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you very much indeed. That's Ella Whelan, they're a columnist at Spiked Online. And whatever your political views, left, right, or what have you, take my word for it, that stuff is worth looking at. Some of it you'll tear your hair out at, but others you'll think, oh gosh, I find myself agreeing with that. It's an open forum and it does contain fascinating stuff.